Well, I don't know how we got here, but we're at the end of August. It's crazy, isn't it? Years flying right by. Well, I promised a couple of things recently. I said that we're going to be going into gangster themes. Not necessarily a month, but we're going to be, like, spreading them throughout the rest of the year. Because we have a lot of them. And this is the one that was chosen for today. Now, I made a comment in the video on Friday that said, I got you right in the palm of my hand. That was AJ's line, and he told me to say it, and didn't think I was going to say it, and I said it anyway, so we both take fault for this. Now, we're going to do our first gangster battle that's going to find out what happens when two Al Pacino movies directed by Brian De Palma go head-to-head. It is Scarface against Carlito's Way. AJ, take it away.
Well, obviously, we usually do similarities. I think that's pretty obvious. They both star Pacino, they're both by De Palma, they both have shiny cases. And, except one is about, the rise of a gangster, whereas the other is kind of like the fall.
Cause and effect.
Yeah. And Tony Montana is obviously young, Pacino, and in, like, his screaming prime, and then, Carlito's Way is, Carlito Brigante is kind of Pacino and his... He still has his shouting scenes, but he's a lot calmer than, say, Tony Montana, though I think pretty much the living human population, everybody is calmer than Tony Montana,
yes.
So, just in general, so... speaking of him, we're going to start with Scarface, I think. Obviously, a lot of people know that Scarface was scripted by Oliver Stone while he was battling cocaine addiction. That's the story, anyway. And a believable one. So, Brian De Palma managed to get his hands on it, and we begin with, obviously, the arrival of the boat. And they've all come to America hoping to find the American dream. And the first time we see Tony Montana, he's in an interrogation room. And it's this really great scene with a really long take, where they're just asking him question after question over and over again. And this is the start of many quotes that you would hear in college dorms and movie buffs everywhere.
Yes.
Not necessarily the same thing. And we first get a look at his face when he's asked the famous question, where'd you get those scars on your face from eating pussy? But eventually he is let go, and he and his friend, Manolo, who is Stephen Bauer, who disappeared off the face of the earth until he showed up in Breaking Bad as an in-joke, basically. I'm sure he was around, but I don't remember specifically off the top of my head. And they basically worked at this little food stand where Manny was more or less a cashier and Tony was the dishwasher, and that's just what they did. And Tony was always going on and on about, you know, becoming something big and stuff like that. So they eventually get involved with this kind of low-rank gangster that's F. Murray Abraham, and they do this job that ultimately leads to the first of many famous scenes, the chainsaw death, where they take his friend and they tie him up in the shower, and Tony basically has to stand there and watch as they... Obviously, there was a lot of controversies and doing a whole bunch of editing to avoid the X rating, so it's hard to tell what this scene originally looked like, but despite what it's known for, the scene is actually doesn't show that much. There's some blood splatter and there's some sound effects, but that's about it. I guess we're to assume they're just taking him apart a piece at a time. But Tony is able to kill the dudes before they can get to him, and this gets the attention of Frank, who is Robert Loggia's character, who is basically the big... You just twitched trying to say Robert Loggia's name.
It's the TV reference from a long time ago.
Did you not know he was in it?
No.
He's basically the big gangster that Tony kind of falls in line with, and hopes to surpass at some point. And this is also where he meets Elvira, who is Frank's girl, who is Michelle Pfeiffer, who as soon as he sees her come down that elevator, decides he will make his own one day. and then it goes from there for a while. I'm wondering where I should go with this at first, because the movie's 3 hours long. There's so many things to mention. Basically, we can talk about the fact of its iconic status and how even at almost 3 hours, it's 250. I think it stops for credits at 245. Almost every single line in the there's almost not a single scene that goes by where there isn't a line you've heard quoted 1 billion times over. Mainly the line during the finale, which I won't humor you by saying. There's actually a scene in Breaking Bad that was heavily inspired by this, as many other things. Where Walt and Walt Jr. are watching it on TV, and it's that scene. Because when you're showing Scarface in another movie, it has to be that scene.
Yeah.
Or TV show in this case. And Skylar came home, and Walt was like, hey, why don't you come down and finish the movie with us? And all I could think was, dude, it's like the very end of the movie. She's going to sit down, and it's going to end. But that's the way movies and TV shows portray this movie, so we just have to deal with that. And it's inspired so many different movies and ideas, and a lot of rap songs. There was a thing that this movie was originally going to do, where when they released this special edition, I'm so glad for De Palma regarding this, but they were going to replace the soundtrack with rap songs that the movie inspired.
What?
And De Palma told them to go fuck themselves.
Well, yeah.
It would have, whatever. That's how I imagine that gangster movie Tarantino talked about doing. That's probably when we'll see something like that. But anyway, yeah, there's a whole bunch of memorable scenes. Some of the memorable scenes that stand out are the death scenes, obviously. This movie is obviously notoriously violent. Starting with, I guess, well, we already, the chainsaw scene, obviously. Then we have F. Murray Abraham's death, where we didn't really see that he was taken, and we didn't see him get, beaten or tortured or anything. We just see him kind of there at the little dining table outside. And then the next time we see him, he's battered and being, hung out of a helicopter. And we see that he has a noose around his neck, and they drop him and they hang him from the helicopter and then just fly off with him dangling there. I always like that little shot where as they're flying away, you see his shoe fly off. And it's through seeing all this violence, I think, that really kind of... Obviously, Tony already had the urge to get to higher places by basically taking people down, but I would say witnessing all this violence in front of him, especially since one of the first things he does in the movie to get the attention of F. Murray Abraham's character is stab the guy he was hired to kill. So he's pretty much been about it the whole time, but I think as the movie progresses and he sees more and more shit, the more he got into the mindset of who he became by the end of the movie. And then there's, I kind of think the Elvira thing is a little... Obviously for the first half of the movie, she's an object. She's only there so he and Frank have something to feud over before the inevitable confrontation happens, and then he gets Elvira for himself. I did think it pushing 3 hours, it did seem a little pointless to go into him actually marrying Elvira. I guess that's to show that he basically... Obviously, Tony Montana is now the iconic character of, if you want something, you just have to do it. Not necessarily always the most positive lights, like in this case, but... Yeah. Yes, he did end up going on to marry Elvira, but then we see scenes of their marriage falling apart. She only has 2 scenes after they get married, and both scenes are of them fighting. And eventually she just disappears from the movie. I'm guessing after the restaurant fight we're supposed to assume she just left him, period, but... it seemed kind of like a lot of build-up to her character for a, anticlimactic payoff. I understand the first half where she's basically the prize between he and Frank's feud, but... whatever. I think his name is Frank. I'm starting to doubt myself. You know who I'm talking about. But yeah, I'm pretty sure it is. It's just your generic gangster name. And then there's the whole other subplot with his character. Or his character. His sister, Mary Elizabeth Master Antonio. And she's always trying to pick up guys and go out and do things. And he's the overprotective brother that she... At the end, she tries to bring on, like, incestuous overtones. I don't think it's that. I think it's just Tony being possessive, like he always is. Because he's possessive of everything in his life, which is how he got to where he is. And then there's that ill-fated love story that we don't really know about it until it's reached its peak, but they kind of hint at it the whole time that something's probably going to happen between her and Manny. But they just keep hinting at it, and then when it happens, it's like already happened when we know about it. In that notoriously cold-blooded scene where Manny's been his best friend through all of this and all of these years, and he goes to his sister's house, and he answers the door in a robe, and she's at the top of the steps in just her robe and a pair of underwear. And Tony doesn't say anything. His reaction is to pull out his gun and shoot Manny dead. Just like that. And then to take his sister out of the house and to his place. Mentally scarring her for the next hour that she's alive in the movie after that. It's worth noting, talking about he and Elvira's wedding. There is one scene in this movie that really stands out that's kind of out of place. Mind you, in 1983, I'm sure it was perfectly in place, but nowadays it seems kind of weird. I am talking about the ultimate 80s montage, where they play that really, really 80s song, and it basically shows his rise to power and them getting married, etc. It's just... At that point, I can understand them maybe toying with the idea of changing the soundtrack, but in 1983, I imagined it worked. That's the one scene that's kind of really dated, I think. But they don't make him a total and complete monster, because Tony has this character trait where he has a soft spot for kids. Like, we see the scene where he's out by Elvira's pool, and he's just casually talking about how one day, you know, she will be his, and then he just says, do you like kids? And we're supposed to assume that means that he wants them. And then when they're in the restaurant and they have the big blow-up, it's her bringing up the idea of, he would be a horrible father if she ever did the idiotic thing of having his children, and that's what makes him blow up at her the most. And then finally, you have your kind of ending with he and Mark Margolis, who also is a Breaking Bad actor, among many other things, where they have to blow up this politician, I think he is. So they put a bomb underneath his car, and the plan is to just detonate it and then be gone. And Tony has that whole speech about how they're cowards because they don't kill anybody face to face, they blow them up, and it's a cowardly thing to do. Tony doesn't want to do the job because, unannounced, the guy's kids are with him, and he refuses to go through with it. Ends up killing them, and making sure the job doesn't happen, which ultimately leads to his demise. So, it's very interesting how that came back to bite him. It's not something you really think about right away until you look at it in retrospect. Apart from the famous scenes, there's also some not so talked about scenes that are really effective. I really love not so much the shootout in the Babylon Club, but the build up to it. When Octavio the Clown comes out and is doing his little weird thing. With Richard Belzer as the MC, by the way, that was great. And you know something horrible is going to go down. Like, when Octavio first comes out, Tony thinks that he's going to be somebody shady or somebody that has a gun, but it's just a clown doing his thing. But then you see some guys at a table over here that have guns, and there's a guy in the rafters that has a gun. and you just know something horrible is about to happen, and the way they're just watching the Octavio act while this tension is building, and we keep cutting back to Manny and his sister in the car. Just the way it's edited, and just the way the tension builds in that scene is really, like, edge of your seat shit. Then there's the really, this is the movie's Kubrick scene, I like to say, where he confronts Robert Loggia's character, and the cop. He goes into this room, and it's kind of a long shot, and it's a gigantic room, and it has that score, that really creepy score that's playing, and this feels such like a scene out of a Kubrick movie. And the way the tension builds in that scene, even though you know the inevitable. When Loggia's under the impression that he's been killed in the shootout at the Babylon Club, and Tony comes in with just a sling, and that's it, holding a gun. We know what the outcome of this is going to be, but still, just the way the tension builds in that scene, with that score and the shots, is really well played. And I guess lastly we can talk about probably one of the biggest and bloodiest shootouts in movie history, and most famous once again. The shootout in Tony's mansion with Sosa's guys after he didn't go through with the assassination. And this eventually, his sister is the first casualty when she's, basically telling him to take her in that way, and she starts to shoot at him, and the guy just comes in and blows her away, and then Tony basically loses it and decides he's gonna kill everybody in the house and out of it. And it's just it's basically the quintessential scene of one guy versus an entire army, and it's this magnificent scene of him at the top of the stairs. It's a little cheesy and played out now because it's been referenced and inspired so many things at this point. But when you watch it, you just can't help but be taken by the fact of how insane this scene is, where it's one person that is Tony with his one gun. Oh, for Christ's sake, his little friend.
I knew you were going to do it eventually.
And this whole army of these dudes. And he actually manages to kill almost all of them. And there's finally that scene where he more or less has, I don't know if he's run out of bullets or if he's just decided that it's not even worth firing anymore. But he just stops, and he's just getting riddled with bullets, but he's not going down. He just keeps screaming, "I'm Tony Montana, I can take your fucking bullets." And he just stands there and takes the shots, and he's still standing. It's the shotgun from behind that finally does it, man. And of course, the ironic shot of him falling into the fountain and bleeding out, and the whole fountain is red now, and it's obviously the globe is above him that says "the world is yours." Which is pretty much the only reference to the Paul Mooney movie that this is technically a remake of. It's dedicated to Howard Hawks, though, so there's that. And this is just that quintessential rise to power movie that we've seen a lot now. And everything. And now I should probably talk about this real quick. We talked about this when we did Full Metal Jacket. This movie is obviously iconic, but it's also just a little tainted. Because there's another connotation to it besides the movie itself, and that's its following. The movie's quality may be kind of overshadowed by the fact that, like I said, you walk into any college dorm room, you'll either see it on the TV, you'll see the DVD laying around, or you'll see a poster on the wall.
Usually the poster.
Yeah, and like I said, most of the time I question, over half the people that have Scarface merchandise all over their dorm room, have they sat through all 3 hours? I'm not totally and completely sure. They just watched a YouTube montage of all the famous scenes. Or saw the famous scenes in other movies. So it kind of... Unfortunately, it's gone from this, great quintessential gangster movie to basically, like, a frat boy oath of sorts. Where people basically sit around and quote the movie if they want to feel like a hard ass. Or they want to impress people or something. So that's unfortunate, but when you just kind of watch the movie and not think about that stuff, it's still the movie that everybody always loved. Not everybody. De Palma actually got a Razzie nomination. But that was back when the Razzies were kind of weird. That Kubrick got a Razzie nomination for The Shining, for fuck's sake, so it doesn't really mean anything. They did hand out some Golden Globe nominations, though. The score, Stephen Bauer and Michelle Pfeiffer all got Golden Globe nominated. So, there's that at least. So, yeah, that's pretty much Scarface in a nutshell, I would say. Carlito's Way is actually different. It's kind of on the other side of things. Carlito was like the big dog of the area, but we start with him just getting out of prison. Even before that, he's actually in the courtroom doing his Mr. Smith monologue with Penn's Dave Kleinfeld just kind of sitting there watching it happen, despite the fact that he's his lawyer. But the big difference between Carlito and Tony Montana is that Carlito, now out of prison, actually wants to leave the life of crime. That old thing. But, not in the cliche way, in the, it's Pacino in a De Palma movie. It's not going to be the cliche, it's going to be what caused the cliche later. That other movies are the victim of. But another thing that really makes Carlito's Way different is, remember how I said Elvira was basically an object in Scarface? Carlito's Way is actually half romance movie. It's half gangster movie, half romance. Because he manages to reconnect with Gail, who is Penelope Ann Miller, who talks like she's become an actress and she's trying to pursue her dream of becoming an actress, when she's actually a stripper now. And he's trying to rekindle this with her because he basically left her high and dry when he went to prison, and she still kind of is mad at him, but she still loves him anyway. And it's a real legitimate romance. It's not like some plot filler. Like I said, romance might as well be in the genre. Like, if gangster romance were a genre, this would kind of be the poster child for that. And she's doing her best to steer him away from Kleinfeld, who is Sean Penn, who is his shady-ass lawyer. They even totally made him look totally different. He's got the Jew curls, he's got the nose, and he's got the glasses, and he's got the bald spot. He looks like Larry Fine. I think this is what the Farrelly brothers saw when they lined him up for the Three Stooges movie back when it was him and Benicio del Toro and Jim Carrey.
Yeah.
And he's this really shady character who's basically, he has two totally different personalities, and this is what's brilliant about Penn's performance. Seems like every Versus I have a Sean Penn performance to say great things about.
Yeah.
He's got totally two personalities. When he's the lawyer, he's basically like really quiet and he's weaselly, but he lets everybody walk all over him. And, you know, he has these, he's just kind of your typical slimy lawyer. But then behind closed doors, Kleinfeld has this whole other personality where, as we're informed later, basically while Carlito was in prison, Kleinfeld basically made himself his own gangster persona. And got himself into some trouble. His own subplot is he's confronted by this gangster who he's representing. But instead of representing him in court, the gangster wants him to come up with a scheme to break him out of prison. But Kleinfeld can't stand being walked all over by the guy, so he sets up the prison break. But what he doesn't tell anybody, the only person that knows the real story is himself. Everybody he lets in on this does not know until it happens. This prison break he's helping the guy set up is actually himself setting up a hit. Where he's going to help them out of prison so he can fucking kill them dead. And he does just that. Quite brutally, too. And that's when we realize that this character is a complete psychopath. And I find it very interesting that we have... The two main characters in the movie are the gangster and his lawyer. And it's the gangster that's trying to get out of crime, and it's basically the lawyer that's more or less the villain of the movie. Because he's the one because Carlito is trying to go straight. He wants to be with Gale, he wants to go away and live in paradise with her. Quite literally, they put it that way. And Kleinfeld, among many other people, are trying to drag him back in. And Gale is the only one that seems to know and tries to warn him that Kleinfeld is going to be his downfall when he brings him back in. There's also a couple of side characters, well-known faces that weren't as well-known then as they are now. John Leguizamo as the character that is ultimately Carlito's downfall, who always introduces himself as Benny Blanca from the Bronx. And he's the up-and-coming gangster who's trying to make friends with Carlito and pal around with him, but Carlito won't have it because he doesn't want anything to do with that. And Benny takes it personally. And there's this great scene where they kind of have a war with each other in the club, where Benny invites him over for drinks, but Carlito turns him down, and then the waitress and the dancer that Benny really wants is fucking Kleinfeld in the bathroom. And Carlito says, you know, fuck him, he can find another girl. Dave's fucking this girl. That's pretty much the dialogue, too. So Benny comes over and confronts him, and Carlito confronts him back and says one of my favorite Al Pacino lines in history, where he takes Benny out back and beats the shit out of him and says, if I ever see your face in here again, you will die. Just like that. Which, of course, comes back to bite him later, unfortunately. It's worth noting that the movie begins with us seeing Carlito shot at the train station, so we know how the movie turns out. The question is how he managed to get himself to this point. Because there's so many different things coming from so many different directions. There's a whole other story where Kleinfeld is fucking him over. And, it's worth noting this is all while Kleinfeld is coked out of his mind. He spends the whole movie just totally coked out of his mind. Where he basically sells information to the DA, who's James Redbourne, who sadly isn't with us anymore, but he was certainly awesome when he was here. And basically getting, you know, also kind of as a way to pull Carlito back into the business. And he finds out this information through Viggo Mortensen, who's playing, and it's nice and ironic because we see, you know, Viggo as this, you know, good-looking guy that knows everybody and pals around with everybody, and, you know, and that was in the past, but now we're seeing him, and Carlito's narrating and telling us who he is, and he says he's a real stand-up guy. And just as Carlito's narration says he's a real stand-up guy, we dissolve, and there's Viggo's character now in a wheelchair. And in his one scene here, he's really great. This was long before he was, like, a big name. 1993, Viggo Mortensen was practically nobody. I think he had done Leatherface by this point, that's about it, and Boiling Point. Where he just had those small villain roles. But he has a really great scene where he basically is this really pathetic soul now, and he's trying to confess everything to Carlito. He's there and he's wearing a wire, and he's basically forced to confess to Carlito why he's there, and he has this great scene where he talks about, what am I supposed to do? I'm in fucking diapers, man. He actually pulls out the diapers to show that that's what he has to do now. He has a great delivery when he calls Carlito a cocksucker. I always love the way he says it. And the kind of the problem with all this is, because of that opening, and just because it's the ultimate plot of he's supposed to run away with Gale and everything's going to be great. Gale's carrying his child now. You just know the impending tragedy is coming. There's the great romantic scene between them that's quite erotic, where he came and he bought her cheesecake, and he's outside the door, but she has the chain. And she says, okay, you can come into the room if you want to, but you have to get through the chain. And she says, if you can't get through the chain, then you can't get in. So she puts on the music and she starts to strip, and she's wearing a robe and nothing else, and she opens it. And he kind of just has to watch this through the chain, but then quickly just bursts in, and the scene goes from there. And I love how they're doing this nice erotic pre-coital thing, and then just as it's about to fade out, she says, "Where's the cheesecake?" So that's the problem though, is the love story is so genuinely romantic, and you want them to get together and go to paradise. It doesn't matter that you know the tragedy's coming. It's still really devastating that you know it's happening. Like I said, there's so many directions it could be coming from, because once Kleinfeld hit the mob boss after the prison break, the rest of that guy's family is after both of them, of course. Luckily, Carlito manages to get the best of Kleinfeld and sets him up, and naturally Kleinfeld gets himself offed quickly. Survives the stabbing, doesn't survive the headshot. And then we lead to this chase that's very much, it really brings out what De Palma had going in The Untouchables. It's a scene of, like, right out of The Untouchables, where it's this chase, they chase him through the train and then through the train station, which we know is eventually where he meets his demise. But they set it up the whole time to where you think it's going to be one of the family members of that mob boss, and lo and behold, there's Benny Blanco from the Bronx that picks him off. Like I said, you see it coming from a mile away, but this ending is so devastating. A lot more so than you would think, given all the obvious build-up to it. You have 2.5 hours of movie to prepare for this ending, and it's still devastating when it is. And the thing that I really love about Carlito's Way is, with Scarface, you kind of have... Scarface has kind of a dirty, gritty aesthetic to it, which is great and fitting for the movie, but what I loved about Carlito's Way is it has a real elegance to it. Like, even the violence when it hits, there's just something... Like I said, it just has an elegance to it that you wouldn't expect from, of all people, De Palma. Like, at this point, De Palma was known for, like, the trash movies, like Dressed to Kill and Raising Cain and shit. And something as, even more so, it has even more of an elegance than The Untouchables, I would say. There's just something about it that feels really... It feels like a mature gangster movie, if you get what I mean by that. Mm. Like, kind of like, this is when Scorsese was really hitting it, when, like, 3 years after Goodfellas had come out, when the gangster movie was going from, you know, gritty and dirty to kind of, you know, guys in suits and shit. Not like Tony Montana's, you know, suits, but I mean, like, real black suit and tie shit. And just the way it managed to combine the gangster and romance effectively, and brought us together, bringing out all these emotions, and still having the hard-hitting violence and stuff like that. I'd honestly take Carlito's Way over Scarface, so... I don't know what what kind of reaction that would get, but yeah, I would... That's just me, that's just what I prefer.
Very interesting.
That's not to take anything away from Scarface, though. Even though I did have to watch Scarface twice before I liked it. The first time I wasn't that into it, but the second time I saw it, I liked it a lot better. But there's just been something about Carlito's Way that I always found was a lot more effective.
Well, that ends another edition of Versus. So hopefully you guys and girls out there enjoyed our Academy Awards prediction video yesterday, and the movie reviews, which are on Friday. Next week, we are going to be talking about some limited releases, since we don't really have anything other than the Identical, so we'll see what happens with that. Yeah, we don't even know if we're getting that at this point. New Versus for next week, actually, the first Versus of September is going to be something that is going to be interesting. Very interesting, actually. Very calming, we'll go with that. So, yes, I'm going to completely throw everyone off by saying that.
That has nothing to do with it, really.
Nope, not at all. But it should be really entertaining. So that's next week, and continue to watch Pop this week for all the awesome content. And as always, AJ, any parting words?